Welcome, travelers. I'm Josh.
I'm Glen.
And I'm Lewanika. And this is Tabletop Journeys, where we will be your not-so-humble guides on the quest for RPG adventures.
Here at Tabletop Journeys, we are all devoted role players and storytellers at heart, and we absolutely love sharing our passion with you. On our show, we feature diverse tabletop RPG systems, demonstrating them through actual plays and breaking down the rules to provide you with tips, tools, and techniques to help you navigate them. We also love bringing the content creators behind these games into the studio to give you a peek behind the curtain with relevant and insightful interviews.
Let us help you get the most out of your story, no matter what game world or system you're playing. Because detailed settings, heroic characters, diverse NPCs, and a focus on story over rules can make any campaign legendary. And now, here's a message from friends of the show.
In a world headed for disaster, 5 strangers with mysterious pasts are thrown together by the winds of fate to try to stop the unseen forces that threaten to destroy their world. Join Craval, a dragonborn with no memory and no past, who is the first of the barbarians of the mountains to be seen in 1,000 years. Cotter, a penniless paladin, running from something or someone in his past. No one, the only tiefling monk the kingdom has ever seen, who has been expelled from his monastery for reasons he has not revealed. Adri, his monastic companion, who hides some deep dark secret she cannot reveal. And Arlen, once a simple farmer, until some mysterious event manifested sorceress powers in him. They must travel the length and breadth of the kingdom of Faroe, searching for the disparate clues that will help them unravel the mystery of the failing of their land, while trying to hold together the unraveling threads of society's weave, threatening to come apart at any moment. They will have to battle nature, plague, politics, and even the forces of the underworld as they attempt to discover and defeat whoever, or whatever, is attempting to poison their world and throw it into chaos. Relic of the Past is a novel-length story told via a clean, custom, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game. Find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever fine podcasts are found, and at poolmedia.podbean.com.
Welcome to Tabletop Journeys. Very happy to be here tonight to go ahead and wrap up our coverage of We Can Be Heroes from BudStuff Games. Joined as always by my erstwhile co-hosts, Mr. Glen Myers, Mr. Lewanika Miller. Gentlemen, how the heck are you?
I am doing wonderfully. It has been an interesting kind of week, personally, professionally, and for my family. There's a big festival in Zambia going on, the Ngoma Cultural Festival and football tournaments, and that's football as in soccer, in Kauma, which is where my father lives, and it's a big festival. It started by my grandfather in celebration of several things, largely cultural diversity. And where the professional and the personal and the family kind of meet is the fact that I was asked by organizers there to record a little something for them, which was amazingly humbling and scary and terrifying and gratifying at the same time. I got very good compliments on what was done, so very pleased with that. On the gaming front, just a lot more work has been completed on the factions book. I'm prepping to go to TotalCon, so that's coming into play. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that's happening here at Tabletop Journeys. We've been putting in place to all in the effort to make a better and better show and keep improving what we do. I'm very excited. I'm seeing some of the benefits of those behind-the-curtain things in place. So,
Mr. Myers, how are you this evening? I see you actually in a room for once. This is a new look for you.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. The RV is outside. It's not gone or anything.
Well, I hope so.
we are in North Carolina, a little town called, wait, how do I say it right? Mebane, even though it's Mebane. A-N-E. It is not Mebane, it's Mebane, North Carolina, visiting Aunt Len. And for optimum Wi-Fi, I'm borrowing a spare room at her house tonight to record. But we'll be down here for the next month-ish, and then headed back across the other side of the state to visit a couple of other friends of ours, Marty included. He's near Jacksonville.
Yeah, love it. Make sure you tell Marty we say hello and appreciate everything that he does for the show here. So shout out to Gunny. Let's go ahead and get rolling here. So like I said, so we have had a month of content all related to We Can Be Heroes, the latest superhero game in the tabletop role-playing game space, put out by BudStuff Games, currently on Kickstarter. So if you like what you've heard over the last few weeks, and if you want to get in on it, make sure you check the show notes down below. The link to their Kickstarter will be there, so you can go ahead and get in on that. It's closing soon, so make sure you go ahead and get in on that. But yeah, it's been like 5 weeks of content here on We Can Be Heroes, so let's start like we normally do whenever we dive into something like this. Let's talk kind of high-level impressions of the game. Who wants to go first?
I think that we had the opportunity to play it first at a Catacon, which I know everybody has heard before. That double opportunity, I think, was really unique to give us a chance to see an earlier incarnation of the game just for a combat encounter, but then a later incarnation of the game as the rules have developed, and see some of the changes that they've made and play different character types with more of a full scenario the second time. So I think that gives us a unique ability to give that high up view, and I can resoundingly say that I am a fan. It brings superheroes to life in, I believe the way we put it in one of our earlier discussions was 3-color comic format. It's 4 colors. Thank you. It's less of the granule breakdown of superpowers that Palladium put out or that GURPS put out. It's much more, I don't know if streamlines, well, definitely versus Palladium, it's streamlined, but I don't know if overall I would, because it's not going in the direction of Powered by the Apocalypse with minimal mechanics and maximum story, but its mechanics aren't heavy-handed, which I really enjoyed. And in the second game, I got to play a speedster, and I got to say, as one of my favorite superhero types, the actual play that we just did really, to me, helped bring the speedster to life in the game. The way that the action economy broke down. At first, I was like, I don't seem that fast. But then I'm like, wait a minute. When I start using all of my action points, look at me run around the room, high five everybody after I took out the last bad guy.
Yeah, that was really impressive, actually, the way that the speedster played out, because you're absolutely right. The amount of movement that you got and the ability to go ahead and do things, like that was always LaFleur's problem, was that 6 action points was never really enough for him to ever do a really cool thing. I could do 2 okay things, or I could do 1 really cool thing that would set up a really cool thing the next round. But I never really got the chance to do any like bang thing. And that was versus the speedster that seemed to be doing bang things like all the time. So I found that really interesting. And I'm not sure if that's just, I'm not going to say that my build was like super optimized either. Through playing, I'd realized like, okay, well, I made some mistakes on some assumptions on things that I thought would work together that didn't actually work together and stuff like that.
I was looking at the superhero build for the speedster power and then some of the other powers. And one of the things I think it's important to note, especially with as much as Twitch was able to do in the course of the scenario and specific rounds, is that while I did a lot, I was not a damage powerhouse. As a speedster, I was all over the place and I accomplished a lot of things. But even when I hit, my superpower die is a D4.
Sure.
Versus most of the other superpowers that are designed for damage, where people are rolling a D8 or higher for the damage from their superpower. Because most of the speedster's power is just the ability to move really fast, which gives you a lot of utility, and that's how I played it. There were several rounds in the final combat of that scenario where I didn't do anything to deal damage. I simply ran around and inconvenienced the bad guys.
Yeah,
which was
think
really useful. Like, let's not forget that how useful that was. Sorry, Lewanika.
No, it was handy.
Yeah, I think what's very important, and I found out through the actual play, that I probably wouldn't have just by reading this early version of the rules that we have. We're looking at version 9.4. Our first scenario is played several iterations before that. So while they are very far along in the process, Kickstarter backers, don't worry. This is going to be a thing. They are very close. Changes that are being made now are via playtest. They're not because they're still quote unquote writing. The writing is done. This is playtest, alterations, and edits. So
I think they're still working on some layout stuff and things like that too. But the rules are pretty solid at this point.
Yeah. So I noticed just in the way the three of us built our characters was a few things. Glenn, you're absolutely right. The Speedster, as built by you, was primarily a support class, so to speak, where you were able to do things to greatly impact the way that battle went. Less your character, that scenario doesn't play out as well as it did, right? My character, who is fairly fast, could not have gotten there as fast and done what you did nearly in the same amount of time. Thus, we likely would have had additional issues in the scenarios. Speedster support class as built by Glenn. But depending on several character build options, it could have gone differently. Depending on what you layered in there, you would not have been as fast or as utilitarian, but you could have built it slightly different and still been a style of speedster. And I think that's where, if you look at comics or shows like The Flash, and you have all those different speedsters, which have various things that they're good at, that's exactly what this game allows you to build. And that's pretty hot. Even the build that I made, I noticed some things that I might change a little bit. I picked one power of all the things I did. There's only one thing on my character sheet that I did not get to utilize. And that's because the scenario didn't lend itself to that power. That power required me to be in a very specific circumstance, which a combination because of LaFleur's power, your speed, and the fact that I devastated a couple opponents as well very quickly, I never got surrounded. So I didn't really get to let loose on one of the things I did. One of my biggest and most damaging power was a response to somebody striking me.
Dude, I feel your pain, because with my damage redirect power for damage absorption, I finally got it at the very end when I came off the building, but then you took him out on the next round, so I never got to hit anybody with it.
Yeah, and for me, it's only in that one moment, but in order to get to where things were fast enough, I consistently had to use one extra action point. So I left a lot of rounds with one action point left, but I needed two to be able to utilize that power. So that even that moment when I got knocked off the building and had to come back up, that was critical. Had I been able to stay on the building, not had that one bad roll, the next time I got hit by the bad guy would have been the last time he hit me. Because when that power unleashes, very few people stand.
I think that you're keying in on something that I felt too when we were talking about the rules. Because the same thing happened to me when I would be going through certain rounds. Like we were talking about earlier, I never really had enough action points to do the big cool thing. I could chip away at it. I think that one thing that would be really cool is if you could carry a certain number of action points from one round to the next. I don't think that you should be able to carry all 6 or even 3, but I think that if you wind up with 5, if you use 5 in one round, being able to roll one action point over to the next turn, I think solves a lot of those problems, because we talk about action economy a lot in the D&D 5e sense, but the way that the action economy here works is that a lot of things take 3 or 2 action points, which is what gets you action locked, right? Where you've done your superhero power for 3 and you've done one of the other 2 action point powers to do something else, or you've moved or something like that. I guess maybe that's like what they would say, is that you get your superhero power, you get your secondary power, and then you get to move some, right? You get to move two zones, and that's your 6. If it were me, I think that it would be cool to even, like, maybe not everybody can, but maybe you can get a power that allows you to push your action points between rounds and stuff like that. Because then I think it opens up those possibilities.
Some kind of AP manipulation as a power wouldn't necessarily be bad, but I'm going to say that overall, it's not completely a disagreement, but I really felt, and that's what I was about to call out in terms of high up view, the action economy of the turn I thought was really well balanced. And I say that because I kept struggling to get everything done, but I got most of it done. I don't know if this is going to make any sense, but effectively, you've got 6 action points. The largest action that you can take costs 3.
Yeah.
Yep.
That still leaves you 3 utility. You can do your superpower. You can do your superpower attack and move and still have 2 left to do some of the other things like evade, etc.
Yep.
But to do 2 superpower attacks or 2 regular attacks in a round, you use all of your action points. That seems to make sense to me. So the fact that you have to choose, but I don't disagree that especially when you wind up with just that one left over, and I don't think it should ever go more than one if they allowed it to be manipulated.
Yep.
And it shouldn't be a main power either, but a secondary power or an auxiliary power that has something to do with anything from time manipulation to being part of the speed force to allow you to manipulate that one action point into the next round if you didn't save it. I could see that as a solid rule.
Yeah.
We could recommend that.
Yeah, I hope that they're listening. They better be listening.
So perhaps we just did.
Chances are good that they will, but I don't want to repeat what Glenn said. I would say one thing, though, because most of the powers are based on your character type, the only challenge I would see to doing that is narratively, I think you could put that with any superhero. They're superheroes. So the fact that they're really good at action economy would make sense regardless of superhero type. But I don't recall that there's a specific type of power that is not keyed on your specific character build. Therefore, it would be very hard to put that in for everybody. You could, in fact, make it an option for anybody, but then think about this. If you took that for your character, which of the powers that you have would you have given up? Because if you gave one of those up, you wouldn't need it, right? So it would have to either be something that every super gets, either by level, which is what I'm thinking would work best. So you don't get it till 3rd level or maybe 5th level. That's a boost. And then you might get it later on. You might get it to you can save 2 maybe, right?
Yeah, right.
And have
like getting another action at a certain level.
Exactly. Because if you do it any other way, the way the character builds work, you can't really give it to everyone. But I also think it would be very overpowering early, or could be depending on what power set you build your character as. But I think by the time you hit 5th level, that makes a really good one. Or maybe it's the level after 5 where you give it to any super who comes up. They get that. They have the ability to reserve one action point for the following round only, or what have you. So I think there's a couple ways to do that. I think we've said it out loud, but certainly we'll be in touch with Spence and Smiley and the rest of the team at various points. So definitely something that I came away with. There must be a way to do that. And I didn't think of what it was. It was literally this conversation with the two of you that kind of led me to a way to do it.
Or maybe an alternate way to spend the other turn resource, Hero's Favor. Perhaps you could spend a Hero's Favor if you wanted 2 more action points in a turn, or something along those lines. Because the Hero's Favor is an interesting mechanic to be added on top of the action points. Because with that one, for those of you out there in Radio Land, the Hero's Favor is actually regulating how much you can use your main power. So as an example, at the level we were playing, we had 6 action points around, but only 4 Hero's Favor for the whole game. And to activate your main superpower as an attack, you have to spend 3 action points and a Hero's Favor. So effectively at that point, we can only use our main power 4 times. Starting at level 1, you only get 2 Hero's Favor. So that's a precious resource that you could choose to spend another way if they added that in as an optional rule. If someone was desperate for another turn or another 2 action points, 3 action points, something.
I really like where you're going with that, but I'm going to go ahead and propose an alternative. And I think that it really, when you get into a game like this, how do you manage your resources? And because Hero's Favor is so limited and so important, I'm not sure that I would use that. But what about this? What if in a given turn, you could spend a point of your Moxie to go ahead and get an extra action point? So what that's going to do is you're either going to be hitting less or you're going to be doing less damage, but you can go ahead and spend a point of Moxie to go ahead and get an extra action point.
Because you add your Moxie to your attack rolls and your damage rolls. That's pretty hot.
I think that could be hot. Right?
Sacrificing a point.
Sacrificing a point.
And that would last until you get a long rest or whatever the name of that mechanic was called.
A break.
A break.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Some really good ideas that kind of on that high level, but I think all of us have stated in various ways, absolutely love the game. The character that I played was so fun. I was beaming like the entire time. I just loved the character. I loved every action I got to do. I mentioned that I might not have used one of the powers, but that was not a detriment. That's more just something I recognized. What was cool is the actions I got to take, the way I was able to operate, and the fact that I got to play a big old beefy superhero who rode a badass bike and got to make cool lightning and power quips. Done. Game, set, match. Very cool.
I mean,
very cool.
Did you ever
very
actually
fun.
ride your bike, though, or was it just like towed behind the minivan the entire time?
No, I rode it
He rode it up to the dam.
That's right. That's right.
The scenario did not allow for it to be used in combat, but I had a couple ideas for that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. That's one thing that I definitely came away with, not just this last time when we recorded, but also when we played in a Catacon, is these characters and the way the rules are is just fun. It's just really fun. I think that one of the things that, trying to find a way to go ahead and say this, because I didn't want it to go ahead and come across as like negative, but like we had so much fun just like riffing on each other and quipping on everything like that. Like that it sometimes made combat run a little bit long because we were like doing so much stuff other than the combat. It's like we were just like playing our characters. It was just an awful lot of fun. And that is absolutely not a knock on the game. It is the game itself begged for the villain monologuing, the Australian guy monologuing, and us witty retorting back and making weird superhero jokes along the way and everything like that. Like when Smiley was hitting on the sheriff, like that's
Right.
like stuff like that. Something about the game environment just invited that. It was so much fun. And this is coming as the guy that is not the comic book guy, right? Like the extent of my comic book love is that I really like the MCU movies. That's my bag. I hear and appreciate when you say that this is a game that feels like a 4-color comic, has that vibrancy of the comic style. To me, the way that translates is that amount of fun, the way that we got into character that deeply, almost to the detriment of the mechanics. It's like we were so deep, making so many jokes, cracking so much fun that it's almost like, oh, right, we're actually playing a game here. We have to go ahead and go beat up a bad guy. So,
right. Well, let's reel it back in, guys, and get back on track. Happened a couple of times.
Yeah.
But part of that also is the chemistry of the creators, because they very much embrace the game that way, and that's what they bring to the table. So it was a blast.
One of the things that we've learned from our dear friends over at the RPG Academy, who were kind enough to host the event where we first came into contact with the team over at BudStuff Games, is if you're having fun, you're doing it right. And I can guarantee that anybody who loves role-playing games is going to have fun playing this game. So it doesn't matter what goes on, you're going to be doing this game right. It was really that kind of game. I thoroughly enjoyed what we did.
And it's clear, too, that Spencer and Smiley and their creative team really enjoy what they did. I hope that came across, certainly in the interview that we did with Spencer and during the game. I hope that their love of the game and the genre really came across, because it was evident in every conversation that we had with them. They made this game because they love this game and because they wanted a game that they could love. The care, like you were talking about earlier, the version of the rules that we play tested was like version 9.4 or whatever. And the software engineer inside me is, oh yes, thank you for like major and minor revision history. I appreciate that. But that's the detail that they're putting into this. They are really cranking through details in this game to make sure that every little bit is right. As content creators ourselves, I feel like we have a really good process to go ahead and make sure that our content is right. And I see the same kind of impulse from them. And it's okay, cool. Yeah, no, they're actually taking this seriously. They're not just putting this out there and they don't care what's in it. They really care about the quality of the game.
Yeah.
And honestly, we could probably learn a thing or two from them about the playtesting process in particular, because we've put out more complete projects by this point, but the amount that they're playtesting this game and working the revisions and making sure that everything is done, they're playtesting on a level that we have not yet. Now, mind you, we haven't tried to design a full system.
Sure.
Our subclasses, they took a lot of playtesting, but not this much. There's a lot that they're putting into trying to make sure this game comes out right.
Yeah, there are magnitudes of difficulty difference between making a magic item, a single stat block, spell, a subclass, making an adventure, and finally going on to making an entire game system, right?
Yeah, there are magnitudes.
I would say that when we do something in a given system, and I'm going to use an example, but not the only system we play or work within, even on a subclass level for 5e, that's in its, 8th year? With
2014. It's the 11th year.
The 11th year of this game with millions of playtests. So the mechanics, unless we build a new mechanic, have, in theory, been vetted, even the ones we don't like, right? They are what they are. We know what they are. So at that point, most of the playtesting has been done. So when we go into building pieces for an existing game, we don't need to do that part of the playtesting. What we need to do is just check it against what already exists to make sure they work well together. That's a different level of playtesting. It's a different amount of playtesting, but there are some technique things that in our conversations with them and the questions they asked us when we did our live that we absolutely can learn from and take into other iterations of our work. So
Right.
a lot there to be said to support and send up this team. They're amazing people. They really are. And like Josh said, if you don't get the sense of their love of this game from what we recorded, then I encourage you to get to a convention where they're playing, follow their page, watch when they're on other people's Twitch and they're playtesting, because what I saw when we were at the table in the Catacon was a bunch of people who didn't just spend thousands of hours working on a game and saying, okay,
Right.
play and tell me what you're going on. They were not worn out of this game. I saw them bouncing up and down. When Glen rolled his hero's moment and then the Max had
Super
a hero's
crit.
moment,
Yeah.
I watched Spencer was on his feet. One of the other team members was on their feet, and the other one who was sitting at the table with us was literally bouncing in their chair. That's what I saw. I saw people who were so excited, even though we were one of 4 or 5 playtests of that exact scenario they did that day.
Yeah,
They
sure.
were still able to bounce in their seats with the excitement. Can't beat that.
Yep.
That's what drew us in. Their excitement and love of the game, the gameplay, the fun at the table, and we've seen it again. So 2 times it isn't an accident, and it ain't a joke. This is the real thing, even though we made jokes throughout. Here at Tabletop Journeys, we've leveled up our game, and we're prepared to make your next roll legendary. We've just started a partnership with FanRoll Dice, and they have over 300 product options to choose from. Gemstone, metal, new liquid core dice, and so much more. Better yet, listeners to the Tabletop Journeys podcast can get 10% off on their orders when they follow the link below and use discount code podcast10. A portion of these purchases come back to us, and this is a great way for you to help support the show.
All right, so something that we got to do this time around that we didn't get to do at a Catacon was actually go through the character generation process. And I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on how you thought the character generation process was laid out and how you thought it worked. For those that maybe didn't pick up on this in that episode, this is a character generation process where you build a first level character, and your first level character has the majority of the work that goes into it. Adding levels on top of that kind of base level character isn't particularly difficult. There's only a couple of things that you get every level. But what were your overall impressions of the character generation process? Glenn, let's start with you.
For the most part, I thought character generation went very smoothly, especially with Spencer to guide us through it and Smiley there to answer questions too. The biggest slowdown, just like with any game when you're looking at new abilities and new skills, etc., was stopping to read them because you want to make a good choice. Aside from that, everything flowed really well, right down from creating all of the substats that add up to your stats, which is an interesting thing that we should probably talk about a little bit, that your overall strength or body score is actually made up of the skills underneath it, and their power levels added together is what makes your overall score, as opposed to your overall score influencing a skill. Your skills are your scores. That was really cool, actually. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I liked that also. And again, not to compare everything to 5e, but if you took the ratings that you have in various skills and added them together, and all of your intelligence skills contribute to your intelligence score. I thought that was a really interesting way of doing it because it both provided a lot of variation, where it's, if I'm looking at my physical stats, I had no muscle, no finesse, all resilience and all endurance, and yet my physical skill was 15. So not a bad physical skill at all, but I couldn't do any of the muscle or the finesse stuff. It was all just like I could take a punch. That's pretty much the extent, and that so heavily influenced my physical skill. So I thought that was a really interesting way to go ahead and lay it out also.
Yeah, my muscle was nothing, but my finesse was high, so I still had an overall good physical stat, unless it was completely strength-based.
As a big fan of the old TSR Skills and Powers game, which I know nobody in the universe other than myself was probably a fan of, but one of the things that I absolutely loved about that game was the fact that you had a basic stat, and this was D&D, so you had a strength score, but it expressed itself in two different ways. So even if I had the same strength score as somebody else, I might have different stats for those substats. And with Constitution, there was health and something else. Every stat had two different iterations. Dexterity had one's ability to target, and then more of one's manual dexterity. And it's been 35 some odd years since then, so I don't remember what they were all called, but I loved that difference because I thought that was a great way to express the fact that I, as Lewanika, can be relatively clumsy. Like, I do some things that are weird, but at the same time, when I was playing football, nobody would assume the way I played football that I was particularly clumsy. But they are very different things. They, like, my manipulation with carrying dishes from one room to the other is very different than how I maneuver through a defensive line or around a cornerback, right?
You just got to tuck that casserole dish like the pigskin and make for the kitchen, man.
Absolutely.
Stiff arm Quentin on the way by.
Yeah. However, my wife gets very frustrated when I start trailing casserole along the house because that's the only way I can safely get a glass dish from one spot to the other. And bringing us back to We Can Be Heroes, that was the sense I got out of having this. I got to build this big, huge, muscled character who had a lot of good physical things going for them, but he had some openings within that. And while his brain power, so to speak, wasn't the highest, there are a couple things within that he was very good at. And so I think that was a really nice way to express variance. It really gave you the ability to make your characters less than one note. I didn't have to be the tank that you see on a Saturday morning cartoon who's one note. I got to be more like a Ben Grimm who is a tank, but he has all these other notes as well. He's not just a simpleton. He can be the strong friend, the charismatic guy, the one that, the ladies love, even though he's this big rocky kind of dude, because he is more than that one note. And most RPGs make it very difficult to do that unless they get so granular, like Palladium. I think Palladium does a great job of that. But the way they do that is much more complicated than this simple method. Skills informing stats, and they're still rolled, was perfect. You got to roll a number of D4s, place them in each of the skills, those rolls, any order you wanted, and then you add up those sections to equal your stats. And to give folks an idea of what those were, we did talk about them in the episode, but I'll just rehash that right here real fast. Intimidation, deception, showmanship, and persuasion. Those all add up to your charisma score. Muscle, finesse, resilience, endurance. Those add up to your physical score. Analysis, observation, science, and mentality, they all add up to your intelligence score. That's brilliant. The biggest hang up in most games is you've got stats that are dead stats. They don't count for much. Everybody knows it unless you're a spellcaster. Why bother with intelligence? There's a dump stat. Here, you can have a dump stat, but if you dump it too bad, you are actually harming your big stat. So you want to be careful how you do that. And I think that's brilliant game design.
Yeah.
And it gives you a way to add flavor and definition between two physical type characters beyond saying this one's a strength fighter and this one's a dex fighter. Those 4 different skills underneath each category let you be several different kinds of smart guy, several different kinds of charismatic guy, depending on how you build it. And that added on to the secondary power, then the auxiliary power, and the innate abilities that you all get to choose to add more flavor to your character, let you create a much more rounded and robust, fully noted, to work with Lewanika's example, character. And I think that all of our characters really stood out that way.
Yeah.
Twitch and LaFleur were both brainy characters also. But my brainy focused more on hacking and computer skills, whereas LaFleur's focused more on construction and the overall engineering and design. We're both smart, but we had different wheelhouses, which worked out perfectly in the episode.
That's exactly what I was just going to go ahead and say too. Is like when you look at my character and Lewanika, I'm not sure how your character stacked up in its physical, but if you look at my intelligence categories, they were all very mid-level. Basically, it was all like 5s and 4s across all of my intelligence categories versus my resilience, which was 8, and my endurance, which was 6. So I was actually way more resilient than smart. I was more just smart in a broad group of categories. So that's why, for the most part, I wasn't succeeding on any of the science checks that we were doing because my science wasn't actually that high, which I thought was an interesting thing. It's the same thing you were talking about too, Lewanika, is all your physical stuff was in muscle. You were muscle all day long, right? I next to no muscle. And what was your overall physical score? Do you remember?
20 by level 5.
Okay, so I was 15, which considering that was my second stat, my second highest stat, I'll take a 15 versus your 20, because I was certainly not as physical as you were, but I was in the ballpark. All of us had a ridiculous high number of hit points, because I think we also realized how important resilience was.
That covered character creation. Y'all want to know my favorite thing about the system that they've invented?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what was your favorite thing about the system, Glen?
My favorite thing that they've come up with as they've invented the system is a way to map grid, like a Powered by the Apocalypse concept of close range, medium range, far range, where you can move one range category per, because it really streamlined combat, as opposed to having 5-foot hexes or squares where combat movement is broken down all the way to the minute movements, which path you take. Did you step on this trap or that trap? Did you go around that corner? And instead, each hex or zone represents 20 feet, or was it
40
feet?
Yep. It was 20 feet. Each zone was 20 feet.
Yeah, so there can be multiple people in that zone, and you don't have to have yourself positioned exactly because everybody's moving around in a fight. So if you're in one zone, you're in melee combat of anybody in that zone. And then one zone away from you, 2 zones away from you, I think long range was at 4 zones.
Yeah.
But that, to me, and it really struck me as we were actually playing the combat encounters both times we played it, how easy it was to grasp movement in the game without slowing down combat, without having to be like, I sneak around this barrel and right up behind him. You could still use cover and you could still talk about the things on the map and say, I'm using this as cover. But that all became very much theater of the mind as opposed to the minutia of crunching every detail.
Yeah.
That one simple piece being easier to understand, although as a speedster it got a little bit more complicated when I activated my superpower. But that one small step streamlined combat so much and made it so much faster. It was honestly my favorite part of the way that they've innovated the mapped out version of the game when you get into the nitty gritty of combat rounds and turns without making it quite the full on battle simulator.
Absolutely. So when we played our initial play test, we did that live. So we played with a 2-dimensional map on paper. And then when we played recently for our AP, that was digitally. So when we got into combat scenarios, we had a virtual map. And having done many games with virtual maps and having done many games with 2-dimensional in-person maps, on a 2D map, you are absolutely correct. The ability to go zones was critical. I don't think it hit home for me how much better that was until the idea of characters at the top of that one tower came up. When the question got asked, how far is that? And he said, it's about 2 zones up. And I'm like, oh,
40 feet of elevation changes the game.
I am literally not taking out a protractor and trying to figure out 8th grade algebra to determine whether or not the distance from where I was to where that is within the range of my power. It's 2 zones up. That is much easier to factor than 5 squares, 3 squares, and trying to figure out what the actual distance is, which, to be honest with you, pro tip, I just count the squares across and that's good enough for government work, right? That's how I do that. But this allowed your powers to function the way the game was designed without adding that extra layer of difficulty. You don't have to take it to nth degree, algebra, to get that figured out, to make it play accurately.
Right.
If you're a GM who has rules lawyers in your group for all their positives and negatives, they can slow down play, even if they're good at it. And even if they are well-meaning. But that's the kind of game mechanic that limits an issue for that type of player. So you have made your table play more fun, more enjoyable, more easily than it has before, simply with a little mechanic like that. I can actually see myself using that type of system when I do theater of the mind games, you're close, you're whatever. STA does something similar with their near close things. That's a solid set of rules.
I liked the way it played into the action economy, too. I know we already talked about that, but the fact that unless you have even faster or superpower assisting you, one action point equals one zone of movement makes sense because we're looking at 20 feet, right? So to get from close range to medium range, you're spending an action point. If you want to run, if you want to go all out, you could move 6 squares. That's 120 feet, but that's all you're doing that turn.
Sure.
I thought it was a great representation of it. I really liked the way that the two fit together.
Yeah, I think that, and not to bring it back to the conversation that we had at the beginning, but my question about the action economy wasn't about whether it was balanced or not, because you're absolutely right. The way that movement factored into the action economy absolutely makes sense. It was more just from a personal point of view. My guy, for the most part, was a gadget guy, so he's doing things from distance, right? All of his things were 2 and 3 zone powers, so I'm not really moving very much. I could go up and take a hit, but, my dude was a pencil-pushing geek. He's not going to get into the melee fight. He's going to go ahead and let his little drone fly over, use its taser power, and try to knock people off the top of buildings. So that's more of what I was saying is that... Sorry, go ahead.
I wasn't trying to stop you. It just, something popped into my head. That is an area that I think could use a little bit of adjustment in the game, because in the whole AP that we played, the only thing that I didn't like was the fact that LaFleur, when acting through their drone, didn't get to use their Moxie because their drone was acting.
Yeah.
But it's your drone, your gadget, your programming, your controls. I think your Moxie should play into your gadgets, because otherwise, why would you want them?
So that was a build error on my part. That's not the rules. That's what I was talking about. So the reason why that is because I did not have equipment expertise in gadget weapons. And the drone's a gadget. And the reason why I didn't take that is because I looked at the powers that my drone had, and its energy blast is a short-range weapon. Its taser attack is a melee attack. I have expertise in short-range weapons and melee attacks. Clearly, I would have expertise when my drone does that. And the way the rules are written, because that's a gadget, you specifically need to have expertise in gadget weaponry, right? So don't fault the system for that.
I'm glad I brought it up so we could clarify, because I was sitting here going, man, that sucks for LaFleur as we were playing, but I didn't want to bring it up and slow down the game. But I missed the fact that it was a build error. And that makes sense because we're playing the game for the first time. And as I said earlier, one of the longest parts of character creation when you're learning a new game is reading through all of the abilities to try to make sure you get what you want and what you need. And that's why a lot of times when we run games, we're like, dude, to like 3rd level, you can change anything you want.
Yeah. And the reason why I didn't have that is because expertise is related to the type of powers that you have. And because I was a nature build with ice cold, that's where I got the expertise in melee weapons and short range weapons. I never got expertise in gadgets. And again, my fault for not digesting all the rules enough, but basically what I built was a character that did 2 things okay instead of 1 thing great.
Gotcha.
I mean, if you look at Lewanika's character, right? You did great things with your strength-based powers. I did 2 things okay. And that's a build error on my fault.
It is interesting that you say that, because the build I did, and I was aware of what I was doing, was also not optimized. I did not take powers that make great use of my strength. I ended up using my powers to be able to get into combat often, with the goal being, how can I get my character into the thick of the fight the fastest? That's where even faster came in. And then when I hit, that's where my muscle comes in as far as my ability to connect. I chose the options that allowed me to get expertise in unarmed attacks. That's not my character's actual superpower. And I made another choice to get the Tesla Arc, which is a weapon, and I took the option that allowed me short-range weapons. My finesse was only a 3, so I wasn't striking with that with great numbers. I rolled really well the few times I used it, but I didn't actually have great rolls with that. But that actually did more damage than my punch, because the Arc does D6 plus Moxie for me. But my punches only do a D4 plus Moxie. My main power was heightened senses. And like I said, it didn't really come up. I basically built somebody who was good in mass combat. The idea being, I spend 3 AP as a countermeasure, and I automatically do 1d12 plus 1d4 plus Moxie and force damage to the target who hit me.
Damn.
But I actually have to be in combat, have the
Yeah.
AP to do it. What I didn't realize until deep into that final encounter, because the first encounter, we really didn't have enough foes. They didn't last long enough for me to utilize it. But in the big encounter, by the time I would get into combat, I never had the 3 AP available to do that. Or the one time I came close, they didn't successfully hit me anyway. So it kind of didn't even come up. But my power was combat based, and it was very retaliatory. So despite all the muscle and the stuff and the showmanship and all of that went into the character, he really needed people to hit him before he got to really unleash. And that was a conscious choice. I actually read that was not the most optimum thing to do, but I thought that was definitely the kind of character I built because of the backstory, and that was how I liked it.
One quick thing just to clarify as I was reading through here. I did not get my equipment expertise in melee weapons and short range from the powers that I chose. I got it because I was playing a reformed villain. So it was a background choice. When I went through and said, okay, here's the type of character that I want to play. And it was a nifty concept. I liked the concept of the character, but it pigeonholed me into a bad mechanical decision. Really, at the end of the day, given the background, it would have made just as much sense for me to go ahead and play a nerd character, and nerd would have given me gadget, which then would have made my drones more effective. Again, it was a story choice that I made that gave me a bad mechanical advantage.
So in the end, though, you got to keep in mind that as you're making these decisions, nothing pigeonholes you, right? I almost went with World Famous because my secret was out. But in the end, as I read through them, I'm like, kid hero makes so much more sense for the guy I'm building. So I made a kid hero. My secret's out anyway, so I'm famous or infamous. It's just not part of my background. You could choose to play that nerd, get your expertise for gadgets, but you could still be a reformed villain.
Sure,
it's just part of your backstory.
Yep.
And so sometimes it's important not to pigeonhole ourselves like that. But it's also an interesting concept. What if they added the option to choose between the following list of expertises based on the kind of character you're building, as opposed to on a background only giving you 2, maybe you giving you 4 to choose from, or something along those lines might be a cool way to just take it one step further and let you further customize your character and what they do.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting choice in the building of the rules to go ahead and have one's origin so closely tied to the expertise that you have, especially where the expertise has such a major component in the mechanics.
In the gameplay.
Right. Yeah. They're really tied together. I like that they're so tied together because, again, it means you have to go ahead and make smart choices. It's like we were talking about with the action points, right? This is a limited quantity. If you leave any action points on the table, too bad, sucker, you're out. And if you don't save enough action points to do a counter or whatever, sorry, sucker, you're out. So it's the same thing. You have to be very smart. The mechanics are complicated enough, and I don't mean complicated in a negative sense. They are robust enough. There we go. The mechanics are robust enough that you have to make really smart choices if you want your character to be super duper effective. And that's a really neat angle. We've played a lot of complicated game systems, right? I'm thinking about Against the Dark Master. I'm thinking about other systems that really had a lot of intricacy in their mechanics. And I'm not sure that we've played a system that had this level of complexity and intricacy, but also played so well, so quickly, right? Their intricacy was only when you were doing the character generation. Once you actually had the character in front of you, it was, this is actually super light and makes a lot of sense. It's a really interesting balance.
I think this absolutely represents the kind of game that when you and your group of friends that you play with on the regular basis sit down to play, once you build your own heroes, and everybody has those, every time you break out this game to run an adventure or a mini campaign or a scenario, this is probably the fastest setup and play type of game you're going to get that I've seen. You will spend more time all about, hey, did somebody go down to the local restaurant, break up, who's got the wings, who's got this or that. That will take you more time than really getting going with this game, which I think is a big feather in their cap. It's a fun and fast game to get playing. Character generation is something that once you get it done and once you're solid with it, GMs take note. If people make a decision that they're like, I didn't really realize it would work that way, we're all friends here. Let's get that fixed. This isn't organized play. It's a bunch of buddies hanging out. So let's get this done, and we'll find a way to make that fun. And I think you can still have that all lend into the narrative and still be a good thing. I don't know, even if I had the option of 4 choices, I would have chosen different things. I really did want my combat character to be able to use Eskrima sticks as well. There wasn't, with all of my options, one that allowed me to use melee weapons and the other things at the same time. Like, I didn't see a way to do that. because you really only get 2 expertises in general. My character has those Screamer sticks, at least in the picture. I would certainly definitely use them in game, and it would probably count no differently than me punching somebody, right? It would still be a roll. At that point, it's flavor and how I describe it. I could still, if I am in that scenario where I get to use my heightened senses power. It's basically a combat sense. It actually lasts for 2 rounds for my character. I spend the points once and it's good for 2 rounds and I have that ability. But it's one of those things that I think I really wouldn't change. I really did want the short range weapon. I really did want the unarmed attack. So if melee weapons is a light hit with no moxie, but I still get to use my strength to roll that hit, so I don't hit as well. Okay. At the end of the day, I'm still rolling a die. I had things that I had a 10 in and still rolled a 2 and didn't hit. And I had a -1, still rocked an 18 on that roll, simply because I rolled the die that well. The dice tell a story, and I was very happy to listen to the story the dice told.
All right. Let's put a cap on this tonight. How about some last thoughts from everybody? Glenn, I started with you before. How about you, Lewanika? Let's go with some last thoughts for tonight.
I've said it before. I'll say it again. Absolutely love the game. I love superhero games in general. I love the superhero genre as a point of fact and as a key element of my soul. But I really love this game. I can't wait to see how successful this Kickstarter is going to be for them. I can't wait till the finished product comes out so we can play with the finished rules and I can take that to my local store and start rocking some really cool super stuff. I went on Hero Forge and designed a mock-up for my character. I can put it on our community page for fun. We can't put it as part of what we do because of Hero Forge's licensing rules, but anybody listening, go right to our community page on Facebook and grab a look. I'll be posting that when this episode comes out, so you'll see what my character looked like, or as I envision them in the scenario. It was just fun to do. It was fun to be a part of, and we met some amazing people. Like, I really felt a close kinship with the folks at BudStuff Games. Thanks, Spence, Smiley, everybody else at the team. Man, this game is it. Awesome.
Yeah, agreed. How about you, Glenn? Last thoughts?
Lewanika covered a fair gambit there, but I'll see what I can add on to it.
Right.
Both times we played the game, the creators' love for the game shone through. Our love for the game only grew. We had a great time, and I got to say, I really love games that fit into that niche between super light and crunchy. And I think this game fits that gambit, fits that whole really well.
Yeah.
It doesn't go all the way to the point of a Powered by the Apocalypse system where all of the rules are super streamlined, but it doesn't go anywhere near to the crunch of even 5e or the other games that go beyond that. That middle of the road to speed things up but still keep you enough detail. Loved it. Chef's kiss, to quote Josh.
Yep, absolutely. I will echo everything that Lewanika and Glenn just said. Tons of fun. Great group of people that made it. If you're interested in We Can Be Heroes, at the point that you're hearing this episode, its Kickstarter is just about to go ahead and end. So go to budstuffgames.com, link right on the page there to the Kickstarter. At the point that we are recording this episode, the Kickstarter has not launched yet. 577 followers on this campaign. And the version of the book that we're looking at is nearly complete. This game is going to be done when it gets its funding. So really looking forward to seeing where this campaign goes. Good luck to Spence and the guys from BudStuff Games. And if you are interested in We Can Be Heroes, go check it out. Highly recommended. Good time. Also, too, plenty of game that we did not scratch the surface of in our actual play. The whole public reputation system. There's a thing with the super teams where you can go ahead and be paired up into dynamic duos and triple threats, and you get like a special move between the two of you if both of you do a thing. So there's a whole section of the game that we didn't even touch on that looks a lot of fun. That is our coverage of We Can Be Heroes. So again, this was our second focus month on a particular indie game that's coming out. The first one was Sentience with Al Spader, and then this one, We Can Be Heroes with BudStuff Games. We want to hear from everybody out there in the audience. What did you think about these features? They include an interview with the creators, an actual play, and a game review after we've done the actual play. What are your thoughts on this? Did you like this format? And we'd love to go ahead and hear ideas about games that we should be talking to. That's how we got into Against the Dark Master, is we reached out to say, hey, what is your favorite game system? So we'd love to go ahead and hear feedback from you all. If there's a format that you enjoy, and if you'd like to go ahead and hear more of this, please leave comments down below. Or if you are listening on Spotify or YouTube or whatever, please leave comments there. there. You can always go ahead and email us also at podcast@ttjourneys.com and let us know what you think. Next week, as always, there's news in the tabletop role-playing game space, and we'll be talking about it. Yeah. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and have a great night.
Later.
Good night, all.
Thank you for joining us. This has been Tabletop Journeys. We would love to hear your feedback on our show today. Join us at www.ttjourneys.com, where you can subscribe to the blog to leave comments and see all the content that we publish beyond the podcast.
You can also stay in touch by subscribing to our Twitter, Tumblr, or Instagram at TT Journeys, joining our Facebook group, Tabletop Journeys, or by sending an email directly to podcast@ttjourneys.com. Our full episodes come out every week on Friday, and every Tuesday features actual play and gameplay showcase episodes. Looking for early access? You can support the show and get episodes before everyone else at www.patreon.com/ttjourneys. Check it out today and see all the awesome benefits we bring to our supporters.
Lastly, if you're listening to us on Stitcher, iTunes, Podchaser, Spotify, or Audible, we would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to the podcast on that platform. Thank you for listening and for being a part of our growing community. And we bid you fair tides, friends, for legends await.